Hello, and first of all, I'm right now in Israel, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and it's Friday night, and I want to thank Gail for having me here, and also shout out to Roberta Arnold, um, and I'm very honored to be here. My name is Yossi Fine, and I think part of the reason why I'm here, other than I'm a musician, and I will talk about it in a minute, I lived in New York from 85 till 95, and then again from 2001 until 2010, something like that. And I was playing. I'm a bass player, also a guitar player, producer. Those are my main things. And lately, I became the musical director of the Red Sea Jazz Festival, which is in Israel. It's in the very, very south of Israel on the Red Sea. It's in the desert. And this festival has been going on for like 35 years. And it's a very, very, maybe the best festival in Israel, not just jazz in general. It's very prestigious. And for me to be now working within that festival is great because when I was back then in the like 80s and the 90s, to go over there and to check out bands and perform there was always a great. And I think that particular festival, because it was so unique and cool, that it introduced jazz to a lot of young people in Israel of the, let's say, 80s and 90s especially, and even the 2000s. And the results that we're seeing because of it is lots of Israeli jazz musicians travel all over the world now, and New York. Um, the jazz musicians that coming out of Israel, the new generation is they're very gifted and very well educated. Lots of great teachers in Israel, and part of the reason is that particular Red Sea Jazz Festival that did all the exposure throughout the years to all ages, and a lot of master classes of great musicians. And we keep doing this in the same tradition. And so it's great that I know that how much influence such an event can make. And it's not an immediate influence, but it's definitely a long-term influence. So that's about the Jazz Festival and the history of the Jazz Festival. Um, Before that, if I'll go back to uh, mid 80s when I moved to New York, uh, I played with a lot of jazz musicians, but more on the funky side of jazz, not the straight ahead jazz, but more like whatever was modern and more funky back then. I played in a band. The first band I joined was one of my favorite bands called Bush Rock, and it had Ken Denard on drums and Delmar Brown on keyboards and vocals, and they used to play for Jaco Pastorius, and in his band, in his word of mouth sextet. And that's how I got to even see them for the first time. Jaco was my hero as a bass player, young bass player. Jaco was like, one of a kind hero for a lot of young people that I think I don't remember, very few jazz musicians ever got to that popularity of what Jaco Pastorius was in late 70s, even in Israel or Europe. It was he was like the biggest name or star that played bass. So when he left Weather Report and started touring with his own band, and they came to Paris, well, I grew up in Israel and also part time in Paris because of my family. My mom's side of the family lives in Paris, and it's West Indian Caribbean roots. So music in that family was very strong, and jazz, soul music, funk, all kinds of music actually. And so I got exposed in that family to a lot of jazz and fusion, and that's how I got into it. So we all went to see Jaco Pastorius, and I noticed that his band was exceptional. He had Mike Stern on guitar and Alex Foster on saxophone, and Kenwood Denard and Delmar Brown. Okay, so we saw Jaco Pastorius, and it was amazing. And then I went back to Israel. About a year later, I'm seeing posters in Tel Aviv saying that a band from New York, like the best funk, jazz, rock band from New York, is about to come to Israel. They play with Jaco Pastorius, but they got their own thing, and their name they called Bush Rock. So I went to see it, and it blew my mind. It blew my mind. I've seen Jaco, I've seen Weather Report, I've seen almost anybody that was a big name within those genres, and they blew my mind. They were like way ahead of their time. It was kind of like more like what gospel chops is now, but back then. Very Delmar Brown came from the church doing his gospel thing, but he also had so much jazz in him. And Kenwood Denard is an incredible drummer that played with so many different people. So anyway, I saw that band and I recorded that show, and I got the cassettes of everybody that recorded that show. And I started practicing on that music because I was like, if New York, that's 1984, if the level of musicianship in New York is so high like that, then I need to practice. So I started practicing. 6 months later, I see again that they are coming back to popular demand and they're being on tour in Europe. I was like, I gotta get a lesson from the bass player. His name was still is Ray L. Wesley Grant, and he was incredible. And I went to the sound check, and I met him, and I started. He immediately hooked me up to the amplifier to see what can I play, and I started playing, and they started playing, and I had like my 30 seconds of I'm playing with them. It was unbelievable for me. Anyway, they remembered something about that, definitely. 6 months later, the bass player left, and it was hard for them to find a bass player that could play that particular style because it was very cutting edge, and this bass player was like, he had his own unique thing. And then somebody, a drummer named Tal Bergman, met with Delmar Brown, and he was like, I know this kid in Israel that I think he will be good for you. And Delmar remembered those 30-second or 1 minute jam that I had. And he was like, yeah, let me have his phone number. That night I got a call and I was ready because I practiced on that music for the whole year of 1984, every day, every day. And so I came to New York to join that band. And the first concert was within 5 days after I landed was in 7th Avenue South in New York, 1985, February 21st, to be specific. And so it was mind blowing to me because 5 days or a week prior to that, I was in Tel Aviv. I was doing a lot of jazz gigs and funky jazz gigs and all kinds of gigs. But within a week, I was in 7th Avenue South, the club, because to me, my dream come true would have been to just go and watch a show at 7th Avenue South. So that was a jazz club that was owned by the Brecker brothers, Randy and Michael. And every night there will be some other incredible band there. Hiram Bullock and Will Lee, um, um, Jocko, Michael Brecker, Randy Brecker, I mean, John Schofield. Everybody was, that was like, you know. Anyway, so I ended up playing there and meeting all those people. And that's how I got into the New York jazz scene of mid 80s that was more like a jazz rock or jazz funk scene. It was not the straight ahead jazz, but also they were going over there too. But it was more like a hybrid of many different musicians there. About few months into that, while playing in this band Bushrock, Gil Evans came to check out one of those shows, and I got a call to join Gil's orchestra. And at first, I told him when he called me, I was like, I freaked out. I said, he called me on Friday if I want to play with him on Monday. And I was like, I'm not, I don't think I'm at that level. I don't read good. I'm not a good reader and of music, and I don't know that type of jazz like this, way old school jazz. It was like, no problem, no problem. You'll get it. I know. And so I started playing in the Gil Evans Orchestra um, from about 19 end of mid 1985 all the way till 91, on and off, not all the time, but on and off. Mark Egan would be the main bass player, and then I was, I think, the second one, and there was a lot of times where he was on tour with someone or whatever, so I would be within that band. And so the experience of playing with the Gil Evans Orchestra for all those years was the best school of jazz that I could ever have. And that was by far, I mean, there would be so much music every time we played, and nothing was planned. Nothing was planned other than some of the tunes that would start playing, and then whoever took the solo, would it be Lou Soloff on trumpet, or George Adams, or Howard Johnson, or Hiram Bullock, or the John McLaughlin. Um, just incredible, incredible musicians. Gil Goldstein. The list is really endless because every time will be different musicians, but it was the best jam band ever because we would go from one style to the next to the next, and it would be all by creating all the parts on the spot. But at certain points, Gil would just stand up and would make his mark, and boom, we would go into what is written in the music. That was the best music school I ever had. And I had many different music schools of life from playing from all different people. But that one showed me how you can make so much music and arrangements on the spot. That orchestra created a lot of the horn parts on the spot. And I think that later on, I ended up playing or arranging horns to different uh, big bands. And my main thing was I write very little parts, and the rest we will come up on the spot, and it will be tight. And the reason was because I saw how it happened in Gil's band. And that was the magic of that orchestra. So Gil was absolutely a big influence on me. One of the questions that, Gail, thank you for sending me that particular question. And there was, what was one of the best advice or some advice you received from an older musician? So here it goes, because it goes with Gil for sure. Um, okay. So here it is. One of the nights I'm playing with the Gil Evans Orchestra on Monday night at Sweet Basil's. And Jaco Pastorius comes and he stands on the side and he just wants to play. And Jaco knows Gil's music in and out. Really, in the Jaco Pastorius big band albums that he had, it was a lot of the musicians that played with the Gil Evans Orchestra. They played with the Jaco Pastorius big band, and and he knew Gil's music very well. So I was like, oh my God, Jaco is there. He wants to play, and I cannot give him the bass on my own. I have to wait for an okay from Gil to do so. And the whole crowd, mainly Japanese tourists coming to New York to witness jazz. And at a certain point, I wanted to prove that I can play old school jazz. And so I started reading the notes exactly as they were written on the charts. And I just played, walking bass, boom, doom, 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 whatever was written. I was like doing it. I was being professional bass player of a jazz big band. And that was not what I was doing most of the time. Most of the time I played that, but I was way more creative within that. At a certain point, Gil said, let him play. And I gave my bass to Jaco, and he came and played. And that was one of the best moments of my school because he played twice as loud as I played. He immediately came to the amp and turned it up. Boom! But each note that he played was so commanding and so thoughtful, and at the same time the most musical thing, and he came with it on the spot. He had an understanding of the music from like as if he wrote it. I remember which tune it was. It was Up from the Skies by Jimi Hendrix, the Gil Evans arrangement. And after that, I got back on the bass, and everybody said that I played 100 times better ever since that moment. Okay. On and the break between the two sets, Gil comes to me and he hands me the cassette of the first and the second um, sh- shows, and he told me he was kind of like grumpy that day, and he said, "Man, if I wanted to have somebody really play like that, like that jazz, upright, I would have just called Ron Carter or Buster Williams or somebody like that, and they would come. But I called you because you doing what you do, and that's why you are here. And you're supposed to do your thing. You were not at those clubs when it happened. And so you do whatever you do, and that's why you're here. And here's the best advice. But if you want to know how to play jazz, learn how to dance." And I was like, wow, jazz was a dance music. It was dance music before. And I remember like walking through Harlem a lot of times back then and seeing certain people dancing jazz. They would have, they would put jazz in the boombox and they would do this specific dancing. And I started watching that things more. And I started to really get to know um, how it should move you actually. And from that point it really changed the whole way I looked at playing jazz or listening to it. It was more from like, first of all, let me find how it dances, and then the rest of the stuff. I mean, I love everything about it, but that particular thing, especially as a bass player, was, totally opening up. Let me read some questions. Uh, oh my God. When Jocko showed up, I was sitting right in front of Gil's Rose piano and I watched the whole drama. During the break, Jocko was presenting, pestering Gil about playing. He kept his nose. If I looked pretty nervous, of course. But, but that I was 21, 22 back then. And every time I saw Jocko, even though he was a friend, I was always nervous around him because you would never know what would happen a second later with him. He was the most unpredictable cat ever. Uh, wow, I don't remember about that, but Howard Johnson, a lot of times, he was like, yeah, he that could be like that. Uh, Oh, that's so great. So you were there. That's amazing. That's just amazing. I'm telling the story, and finally somebody was there. That's great. So yeah, so that was for me, that was like, that night for me was huge. Yeah, I got nervous when Jaco came on stage or whatever, but not but after that I played and I got good because the rest of the band after the second set came and said, "Man, the way you played now, that's the way you should play. That's it." And so it did help a lot. And just the fact to deal with that type of situation gave me later confidence. Um, and so, and anyway, to me, Sweet Basil and playing with Gil Evans was the best music school ever. And all the musicians that would go through Sweet Basil, it would be like rock musicians. Everybody would come to check it out, even for a quick minute. But it was an amazing time. Uh, who else? That year, I also played for a small tour with John Scofield, who just came out of Miles with his album Still Warm. Those were his first shows um, as a solo artist after playing with Miles. Uh, yeah, George Adams and orange was the color of her dress. Absolutely, that was it. Later, I can maybe on the Facebook, I'll find the link of a show, specific show, of the Gil Evans Orchestra with special guest John McLaughlin and George Adams and all those tunes live in Italy. I found it on YouTube as just an audio, and it came out as an album. Yeah. Um, Thank you very much for Yossi, your music legend. I'll tell about it later. I did some stuff in Israel, and it's cool. Um, so where was I? I was in Sweet Basil and those things. Yeah, John Schofield, and then later on, Kenny Kirkland and Jeff Watts. We had a thing with within Stanley Jordan's band. Stanley Jordan later in 1989, I started playing with him, and part of that tour at certain point was Kenny Kirkland and Jeff Watts. Um, and part of the other part was Bernard Wright on keyboards, sometimes Ken Woodenard on drums, Cody Muffett, Charnet's brother, um, and JT Lewis. I also played with Lou Reed in between in 1987, and Lou Reed was rock and roll. However, J.T. Lewis, the jazz drummer, a good drummer, so he played there. And Fernando Saunders was the original bass player who I replaced for a year. And so there was always those, jazz fusion musicians that was going in and out of many different styles. Later in the 90s, I played with Michel and Dege cello. Those are all my New York years, and tons of jazz gigs. And I got it all in. And I noticed that a lot of times uh, the musicians that I really admired, and I met so many of them later that all my heroes actually, almost all of them, other than Miles, who I saw in Sweet Basil coming to check out Gil one night, and I was like, oh my God, Miles, but that's it. Uh, I met almost everybody that I wanted to meet, and I noticed when I would go to their home or whatever, to I would like, well, I wonder what they listen to, and they listen a lot of time to African music, and so it got me later in life wanting to. I dove into African music for a long time, and I had the project called the Eccentric Sound System, and it was supposed to be like extra Afrocentric, but it's Eccentric Sound System, and I just sampled and did a lot of collaboration with African musicians from all over the continent. And again, it was based on some traditional vocals from Africa or rhythms, but that whole arrangement thing that I got from Gil of how he approached things, I got into that particular thing of African music. And so it was like, I don't know, a hybrid of all kinds of things which is related to black music. But I wanted to find out the origin of black music, the American. So I went into Africa and I found a lot of stuff there. And I never got. I'm always diving more and more. I find like Coltrane, the original vibe of those things, and all in African music, definitely. Um, no, I never worked with Ray Lima. Uh, no. So 10 years in New York, doing all those tours, and it ended up being after all those years that I would play with so many different musicians. So it'll be Gil Emmons, then it'll be Lou Reed, and then it'll be Michel Ndegeocello, and then it'll be Naughty by Nature. It'll be all those different genres. So whenever people ask me, so if they were rock music, people, and who did you play with? I would be like Gil Evans, who? John Scofield, who? Stanley Jordan, who? Lou Reed. Ah, Lou Reed. Okay, switch it. With jazz music, jazz guys or whatever. Who did you play with? I played with Lou Reed, Michelle Ndegeocello. They don't know. So I never had one name that would unite everybody, and I always looked up for Miles Davis because he always renewed himself. He never stayed the same. And he always kept it moving and moving within the times. So to me, that was an incredible thing. And my one dream was, that never got realized, was to play with Miles. However, when Miles passed, I was like, okay, so who else other than Miles? Just in that particular thing. And I came up with David Bowie as a figure that always keeps renewing itself and reinventing itself, and it's always unpredictable in whatever they will do. And I got a call from David Bowie in 1985. I'm sorry, 1995, and I ended up playing on his album and called Outside, which is a lot of improvisation within the album, lots of improvisation, and jazz musicians mainly, not only, but mainly Joey Barron on drums and Sterling Campbell, and Mike Garson on piano and keyboards, and Carlos Alomar on guitar. And when I got into the studio, the first thing I met was David Bowie. And the first thing I saw, he had his saxophone. He's a saxophone player, and his saxophone was hooked up immediately. And Joey Barron, the drummer, is John Zorn's drummer. So that's how Bowie would, he would completely unique, figures that he would put within the same room to play, to make music together. And he asked me, who did I play with? And so I told him Lou Reed, this and that. When I mentioned Gil Evans, he was like, oh, okay. And that was, from that moment, it was like completely cool. So that was, again, the same spirit of open mind and open mindedness, and like just let the music happen with David Bowie, just as it happened with Gil Evans, just different genre and different um different thing, but same spirit behind it. And those are the type of musicians that are really, up until today, I kind of follow their thing. Always keep it moving, always go up with the times. Don't forget the history, but keep it up with the times. And I saw at the Red Sea Jazz Festival about 4 years before the pandemic, just before the pandemic, Herbie Hancock came. Now, Herbie Hancock to me is, the if somebody that is still alive that I look up to, it's Herbie for sure. I think through him I got into jazz, and so Herbie is incredible for me, and I saw him still keep doing it up until now, and I really love that. Um, what would I say to young people? That's my, I guess, my last question to answer. What would I say to young people? Which I say always: keep doing your thing, play music, even if you're not going to be a professional musician. It doesn't matter. It's just what, if you keep playing music, whatever instrument that you play at any age, it will keep your sanity and will keep your health, your mental health on a much better level. Just doing it, just doing that one thing. And I think that during the pandemic, when everybody was, in quarantine and all of those things, musicians, even if they were just amateurs, I think had, if they played their instrument, I think for that moment they had a few hours of actually bliss, because you didn't have to go anywhere, no pressure, just stay and play. And that, when it came really handy, I think, to a lot of people. It doesn't have to be just a musical instrument, but absolutely something that you love doing. That's absolutely a must. Whatever you love to do, keep doing that. And if music is your thing, then absolutely do that. You don't have to look at it as a profession. Um, and that's it, I think, for today. My time is up. And if you want to contact me, you could leave more, more here on Facebook. You could absolutely, or Yossi, which is Yossi at Forum Pro, which is forumpro.co.il. Yossi at forumpro.co.il. And you can reach me there, and especially regarding the festival. If you're a booking agent, or whatever, or a group or a band, that's where you can send me things. I'm totally open into new things always, and I'm actually, that's what I'm looking forward to bring some stuff, which is, to find some new exciting stuff. So thank you so much, Gail. Thank you for having me again. It's been a pleasure. If you want to find, you can find me on YouTube. I got my own channel, Yossi Fine, or The Real Yossi Fine. Also on Facebook, Yossi Fine. And on Spotify, under the name Eccentric Sound System, which is EX-centric Sound System, or Yossi Fine. I have many different things that I'm doing. And that's it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And namaste.